I'm Paige. This is Pixel Perfect Podcast.
I'm Aaron. Way to let me say my name before you said it's Pixel Perfect Podcast.
I just wanted to say it before I forgot. I just had a feeling it wasn't going to come out. I didn't say it right away. Like, it's just
it was just going to be
verbal
gone.
vomit. It had to happen. I'm sorry. I apologize. Oh man. I guess you could say this is part 2 of our Twilight saga coverage.
Call it part 2 because we did Twilight and now we're doing. So we did Bella and now we're doing Edward.
Yep, exactly.
So I would definitely call it part 2.
Even though they don't do each other. Yeah.
I'm realizing now though, from meeting Midnight Sun, is from Edward's perspective, I feel like they got way closer. To doing it.
Yeah.
Than from Bella's perspective.
It's more apparent. We'll jump into that very soon because, in my opinion, there's unsettling news came after this book came out that Stephenie Meyer plans on writing 2 more goddamn books in this universe.
Not going to be Edward centric.
No, and she did she make it clear who it would be around? You froze again.
Oh. She said that she loves creating.
Hold on, I think you have to re-say that because your camera went all drunk on you. And your sound.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, you're good now. You can.
All right, hold on. Okay. So what she said was that she really likes creating mythology, so she really likes creating worlds. So I don't think she's gonna go back to Forks in the same way she did before.
Okay.
So, she apparently being in Edward's head made her feel extremely anxious.
Gee, I wonder why.
He's one needy, anxious boy.
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, she's got 2 more books planned, but they're probably not going to be what everyone is looking for. I think she's really going to be writing them for her.
Okay.
Really more than anybody else.
That's fascinating.
Which I think when you have that much money and that much fame, you're allowed to do.
You just do whatever the hell you want, yeah.
Just do whatever the hell you want, yeah. Stephenie Meyer. Go for it. Just make yourself happy.
Right. Absolutely. But I don't know. I don't think I'd read them. It really is going to depend on what they're about.
So too, but I think that I'm pretty invested in Twilight as a single, and I was invested in Midnight Sun as a single, but like I never read like The Second Life of Bree Tanner.
No.
Like I never cared, like so. Yeah. I don't think either of us are probably gonna end up reading it.
Yeah, I doubt it. I think The Second Life of Bree Tanner came out when I was like past my Twilight phase, so I was just like,
yes.
I don't give a F.
I think it was the same thing with the later on movies, where I never saw those.
Yeah, I only ever saw Twilight, and then while still being a heavy fan, I remember sitting in the theater being like, oh, this is bad. This is real bad.
Yeah, so Robert Pattinson can act, but he keeps picking bad scripts.
Yeah, I don't know. And I love watching any of his like interviews or seeing gifs of him talking about the movies and him actively being aware how much it sucked and yet still participating in it.
Cast Edward though. Probably paid him gobs of money.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Alright, so yeah, we're cutting out the news item except for when it relates like this because nobody was sticking in past 10 minutes on YouTube. That's it. That's the reason.
That's the reason. So, but if you want to keep up with IGAR news updates and stuff, you should check out our website, follow our blog or social media. That's the word. And we try to be active there about stuff that's going on. Like I noticed the trailer for Batman came out recently and was like, no. God damn it, you froze again. Oh god.
I think it's just gonna be a rough internet episode.
Does your internet get worse when the weather's bad?
I don't know. I think it's just bad.
Cool stuff. This will be fun. Just like the way your internet is acting is the way I feel about Midnight Sun.
Oh, we're gonna have a very interesting episode.
Because in my opinion, it was just bad.
I think that there are aspects of it that were bad, but in general, I was more interested.
I was bored to death.
I was not bored to death.
Less interested reading this than reading Twilight. And they're
Tell me why.
because it just dragged on forever. Or as a Goodreads review put it, it's just filled with incessant self-loathing from Edward's inner monologue constantly, and like I don't know, just hashing out every little piece of information and tiny minutia of everyone's emotions and body language. I don't know. It just dragged on forever for me. I was like, there's no reasonable explanation for why this is nearly 700 pages long.
I think the part that frustrated me was when he kept waiting for her to run.
Oh
And so
my
every single time
god.
he told her a piece of information that was like a little like upsetting potentially, he would just be like, "Is this gonna be it? Is she gonna run this time?" And I was like, "No, buddy,
It
calm
just
down."
even like and he took like a break from it too, but like even at the end when we get back to like her getting severely hurt because of James and whatnot and like that feeling comes back and I was like, just shut up.
Girl, I shouldn't say I liked it better because I don't feel like that's accurate. I just was more interested as we went along, and this might have been because there were pieces that were filling in for me that I've been waiting to hear about since I
Mhm.
was 13 years old.
Yeah, so I think I see where you're coming from with that because there were pieces, and I think we're talking about the same pieces, where I was like, oh, I like this, but it also just made me more frustrated because it felt like retconned material, and it felt like Stephanie Meyer took all the criticism she kept hearing and was like, I'm just going to fix it with this book by adding dialogue and scenes you didn't get to see in the other book.
I think partly with that. I think that there was actually a clever thing going on where she was showing details I wanted from the first book that probably wouldn't have been interesting in the first book, but that were interesting in the second book. Like I'm thinking about Bella's answers during those days as he's questioning her incessantly.
Yeah.
I don't think would have been interesting in the first book. I think they work really well in the second book.
I think more glimpses of it in the first book would have been nice, at least to kind of like get an understanding of what her personality was like. Like at least like if she had given us an example of her answering a question that was more interesting, like her career aspirations, even just including that one question, I feel like I would have been like, okay, Bella has some substance to her personality.
But there are definitely places where like Edward mentions how he's being controlling, and I was like, all right, well, this feels like a throwaway to make sure that we know that she knows
Mm-hmm.
that this isn't always the healthiest behavior.
Yeah, which I found that more disturbing that he was actively acknowledging it, but then still continuing to do it. And I'm like, that just makes your creepy behavior more intentional and gross. So I don't like.
Yeah, mixed feelings about that. Mostly, I think what makes it mixed for me is that it turns out that Edward is even needier than Bella.
Oh my god, needy bastard, full of
Like you read
anxiety.
Twilight and you're like, it can't get worse, and then you read Edward's perspective and you're like, oh, it can get
It
worse.
can get worse. It can get worse. Like you go from hating being inside Bella's head and just like I don't something about Stephanie Meyer should stop writing in first person because I think writing in the person's head she like destroys them and you just like the people that they're interacting with.
It definitely like Alice more.
Yeah,
Or not. I loved Alice. Alice was always like she's
she's
Alice.
yeah.
But like it was really interesting to see more of her from Edward's perspective and just to see more of her and how she thinks. Like I thought the way we got to see her powers in this book to be really interesting and really engaging.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes it droned on a little bit for me in terms of like over explaining it, but I did like that aspect and like learning kind of more about vampiric nonsense. What else was I just gonna
See,
say?
I had bits and pieces where I would start skimming rather than reading,
Yeah.
but the book in general didn't drag for me.
Oh, it dragged so much. Like when, like the meadow scene, like the quintessential meadow scene, I think is twice as long in this book because every other moment, Edward just fucking has a flashback and starts reminiscing about his own life for like 10 pages, and you're like, I don't care. Speed this up.
I didn't have a problem with it.
Oh my god, it drove me
I think
friggin'
I
bananas.
think Edward has just always interested me a lot. And his motivations and his history always interest me especially since I read the original Midnight Sun way back that was on her website. So for me, this was just really fascinating and I felt a little like I was 13 again and you're just like, no.
No, it wasn't
No.
doing it for me. it's just like the parts that were good that I liked just in turn made me frustrated because I was like, I feel like you could have done this better. Like you could have made use of this in the like when Edward is like observing Bella's behavior and getting to know her. Like, oh, this is a note that I wanted to talk about in the last episode. I was about to launch into a rant last time we were talking about Twilight about how Bella has this rampant martyr complex and how frustrating it is. But in Midnight Sun, it's framed in a much better context, and you kind of learn what her personality is like, and that she's actually just a genuinely kind, selfless person who's just her instinct is to do nice things for people, and we see that through Bedward's Edward's observations of her, and just like when she chimes in on a conversation to make Eric, is that his name? To like make Eric,
Comic-Con thing?
yeah, the Comic-Con thing. Like it's just like knee-jerk reactions to be kind, and I'm like, I feel like that could have been. I know it's first person, but it could have been used in the first book, not as Bella observing her own behavior, but just maybe framing a conversation around her doing it without like really acknowledging what she's doing, and then we could have gotten to know that she's just a kind person.
I think she's better at showing versus telling when she's not in the person's head.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, Bella just comes off as extremely awkward in the first book.
Mm-hmm.
And the second book, she comes off as extremely almost like empathetic and knowledgeable of the world around her.
Yeah, I could relate
And
to
like
her
how
much more.
people relate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she's just a genuinely, like, I'm more interested in her. I think she's a better person. I understand why he likes her. Like, I understand the fascination so much better from his perspective.
Right.
From Midnight Sun.
But then again, that also like made me frustrated because I was like, did you actually frame her like this in the first? Like, is this the personality you had in mind, or are you just retconning things?
I think she just didn't have the skills back then to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was her first book, like, ever, I think it was like her first venture into writing at all.
Yeah, and I found out she got picked up on a huge book deal, like right out the get-go with it.
Yeah, I mean, someone made a lot of money. But I don't think she knew how, and I don't think she had an editor that would tell her how.
Yeah,
and like encourage her to get her there. Yeah,
I think like she still is suffering from a lot of the problems we discussed in the last episode, writing wise.
I think she's got a little more confident, and I'm not necessarily sure that was the best thing for her.
Yeah, like I kind of
if that makes sense.
It felt like she doubled down on the parts that weren't good.
But like, I did genuinely enjoy Midnight Sun.
Really?
I genuinely enjoyed it.
I just did not at all. Oh, another thing that really frustrated me that was like retconned plot was Edward's trouble with reading Charlie's mind. I'm like, there's a whole conversation in Twilight and in Thinking Midnight Sun. I don't know, my eyes glazed over in a few parts where Bella's like, I'm the only person whose mind you can't hear, and it's like, I feel like Edward would have mentioned that he has a lot of trouble reading her dad's mind, so why throw that in this book?
To be fair, he can read her dad's mind.
Yeah, it's just like, but he spends enough time thinking about how much trouble he has with it, and how interesting it is to see why, like, he thinks about, oh, maybe this is why Bella is like this. I have a hard time hearing her dad's mind, and then also goes as far to wonder what Renee's mind is like, and contemplates how opposite Renee's mind is from Bella's. So I was like, this would have come up as a conversation at some point between the two of them.
But again, I'm wondering how much of that was her retconning and how much was her not showing what she had in the first book.
Yeah, and I think that's just why it frustrates me.
I mean, I am, because she does seem like the kind to just build out her world as much as possible. Because, like she said, she likes the mythology, she likes creating, she likes history. She's crafted these whole history of people, and I don't think she's J.K. Rowling. She's like to the extent that J.K. Rowling is.
Oh yeah, she's certainly not.
And
like
J.K. Rowling's
tweeting shit out.
Yeah. So I do think there's a little retconning. I'm just not sure it's as much as maybe. I'm not sure I agree with you that it's as much.
Right. So
if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. It's just like you're left wondering how much of it was because it feels that way.
Yes, I that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I think that Twilight and Edward's son. I think that Twilight and Midnight Sun complement each other very, very, very well.
That leads into my other thought, is that I think this book could have been killer if it was from alternating perspectives.
Oh,
It would have been way, way better.
right.
So much better.
And it would have forced her to cut shit too, which would have been good.
Yeah, because we can like get rid of the boring Bella pieces and get rid of the boring Edward pieces, and then understand, because there's so much like miscommunication between them. Like reading Twilight, you constantly see Bella like underestimating herself and like feeling unworthy, but then you find out Edward is doing the same thing. Like
Worse.
like always in his head being like, oh, she's revolted by me. That's why she's like throwing herself away from me and stuff like that. And it's like, you two are just two dumb teenagers who have no idea how to be in a relationship.
These novels, I think, really do encapsulate what first love feels like and what it's like to love someone as a teenager.
Yeah, it's horribly awkward. You're constantly second guessing yourself. Like, you don't know how to interact with the other person, and that is apparent. So, like, can you imagine if, like, we got alternating perspectives of them feeling that way? Like, you'd just be like, you dumb idiots, and you'd feel bad for them.
Now that you've said that, I'm like in mourning of the book I didn't get.
Because, like, you could have, like, I don't know, you get a chapter of the questioning from Edward's perspective, and you get to know Bella's personality through questioning, and then like you have the meadow scene from Bella's perspective, and then that's like reduced greatly from the way it was with Edward, and then it just I just feel like it would have been so much better.
But yeah, just the obsession of teenage, it's so teenage.
Yeah.
Just the like, we're gonna be together forever, and like I'm obsessed with you, and I'm just like, I feel like it really captures the feeling of being a teenager.
Right.
But like, I just hate you now.
I know.
Because it's just gonna be in my head.
As I thought it, I was like, wow, that would have been a good book.
Oh my god. I'm wondering, kind of going back to the retconning thing, this book makes it very clear that Edward was kind of always planning on leaving right after the James thing.
Yeah, that's way more apparent now.
I was wondering how much of that was retconned, but I don't think so. I think that was always her intention.
Yeah, that was one of the few parts that I was like, this seems believable based on like everything she had built. Because even in Twilight, like so much of his conversations that he has with her at the end very much seems like he's still of the mindset that one day Bella's gonna push him out of his life, or that he'll leave on her behalf, even when we're not in his head. So that seemed very legit to me.
I think it definitely helps with the whole, because you remember reading New Moon, and we're like, why the fuck does he leave? What is he talking about? Why does this happen?
Yeah.
And then you read your Midnight Sun, and you're like, oh, he was always planning on leaving.
Yeah, and like the Jasper thing was just kind of like the final straw for him being like, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Which I get, because if somebody kidnapped and tried to torture the woman that I'm in love with because of me, that's a pretty intense shit to go through, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and again, like, her describing someone's ordeals of the person like outside their head is just way better, because it was way easier to understand how terrible that situation was for Bella through Edward's eyes.
I was reading it and I was like, oh, this is much more traumatic than I remember thinking it would be.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you're in Bella's head and you're like, what is he just needs to like get over it. Of course she loves him. It's fine. Everything's fine. But then you do it from Edward's perspective and you're like, oh, this is fucked.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're like, girl, run.
But like, I get why he hates himself so much.
Yeah.
Like, it's annoying to read.
It is. It's just too heavy-handed. Like, it makes sense, but she just leans into it way too often, in my opinion.
It's a writing problem, not a content problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I can agree with that.
Charlie is still the best.
I love Charlie.
Charlie's the best.
He is the best.
And you get more.
Yeah.
Like, that image of Charlie sitting in front of a dark TV, not watching it,
gutted me.
Like, broke my fucking heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, and like, for some reason, reading it through Edward's perspective gave me more to like why Charlie hates him so much. Like, you always get it. Like, you read Twilight and you're like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, yeah. Like, protective dad hating the boyfriend. Understandable.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, afterwards, like, Charlie's the only one with common sense. He's the only one that's like, this seems not healthy and
Right.
great.
And you get to understand too through him and Renee that he's speaking from personal experience. He can see it's unhealthy because he's the same way.
And it's that interesting note where Renee is like, well, is she like Charlie or not?
Yeah.
I think the real difference that Bella found someone who was equally obsessed,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it seem better, but it's not.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
you go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was kind of switching topics because I was just looking at my notes. So go ahead if you had a continuing thought.
Nope, I lost it because my voice cracked and I was like, I need water.
It's going to be a very chaotic episode.
It's fine.
And this is like right after a friend of ours told us that we need to be less chaotic.
I know.
And now we're just
Right?
releasing like the most chaotic episode of all time.
Oh my god.
We're sorry, Tyler.
Sorry. Don't hate us.
The thing I was gonna is we kind of already touched on it, but I kind of wanted to be more explicit of just like, did you like Bella better? Did you see her less of a blob? Because that was one thing that we put a pin in our Twilight discussion.
Yeah, she had a personality in this book finally.
Yeah, I found her all of his questioning for those 2 days to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think we kind of got a glimpse of like the kinds of questions he asked through Bella's perspective, but I definitely like it's nice that he's asking all those questions. Like he's genuinely trying to get to know her. He wants to know more about her, and it's nice. It's like that's how a relationship should start: is you getting to know each other.
I feel like there is so much more of a foundation to their relationship in Midnight Sun than there is in Twilight.
Yeah, yeah.
Like an actual moving beyond infatuation, understanding what they love about each other foundation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it the greatest foundation in the world, but it's at least there.
No, like
which is something I don't think it is in Twilight.
Yeah, and like she tries to like briefly, and I guess I can see why she didn't include that perspective in Twilight because Bella finds information about herself uninteresting. But I still think we needed a little bit of it.
I think going back to what you were saying about the teacher one, I think would have been like when she's answering questions about her career.
Yeah.
And she's like, I guess I'll be a teacher. That sounds fine. I feel like just that would have given us a lot of insight into Bella's personality. Especially because I feel like when you read Twilight, because I read them back to back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like alternating chapters. So I kind of got what you were talking about, which I think is why I'm mourning it so much, is I kind of got...
You can see the potential.
Yes. He's asking much more important questions in Midnight Sun than she gives us the impression in Twilight.
Yeah.
Because in Twilight, she just talks about, like, colors and flowers and...
Yeah.
But in Midnight Sun, it's her relationship with her mother and her future aspirations and, like it's very much more foundational than Twilight.
Right. They're, like, legit questions to get to know somebody.
So I legitimately enjoyed Midnight Sun just because I feel like there was a lot more content to it and I felt like there was a lot more interesting things happening in it.
I think I felt that way to a certain point, and then it got to be too much for me because I think in the courting part of their relationship I was like, oh, I like there are some things I get to see glimpses of that I didn't before, that we get to know Bella better and understand Edward's anxieties better. But I think after the Meadow chapter is when it all went downhill for me. Because like that just dragged on forever. I was like, this is frustrating, and then it just continued at that pace for the rest of the book, and I was like, kill me.
I didn't have a problem with it.
Well, we knew we were going to disagree eventually.
I know.
I can't believe we made it this far before we did.
One thing I was going to talk about is, because we talked last episode about how Stephenie Meyer didn't really lean into the romance thing in terms of plot as much as she could have, right? Yeah. So, like, for Midnight Sun, I'm realizing she had a much longer game in mind even in Twilight, right? Because you have to have James to have the rest of the series. You have to have James in order for Edward to leave.
Right.
So I think she had the long game in mind even while she was writing Twilight.
Yeah, I think so. I think I read interviews from her where she said she had like the whole series like came to her, like she knew what was gonna happen, I think.
And so I'm kind of taking back my thing a little bit about, I mean, I still think there was a better plot that could have been had. But Midnight Sun, because I remember last episode just talking about how the drama could have come from like Rosalie and the family and all that stuff.
Yep.
But Midnight Sun kind of does that too. where Rosalie's interactions and feelings about Bella are much more apparent and much more there and much more important.
Yeah, you get like a better sense of like why she acts the way she does,
Yeah.
and you kind of
And
get
I think, yeah, no, I mean, I get it. I really do.
yeah.
I mean, I think that there's an extent to which, like, at the end where she refuses to help save her,
Hmm.
where, like, she's just like, no, I won't help, that I'm like, okay, your entire family just went through hell to protect this girl. Like, you're not even
Oh,
gonna, what?
that led me to another thought, but you can finish what you're saying.
Yeah, I feel like by the end of it, I didn't really, I understood Rosalie, but I'm not sure I liked her.
No, you definitely like you start out like understanding where she's coming from, and then you're like frustrated with her because she takes it a little too far, and you're like, what the fuck,
Yeah.
get your shit together.
I think that's this book in general, is it's great until it takes it a little too far.
Oh my god, yes, that's like that's it. That's the tagline. That's it. It's good until it takes it too far, which it does with so many components, the good and the bad. But what you said reminded me of another problem I had in that you learn more about Bella's rescue in Midnight Sun, and they injured and harmed so many people on the way to that dance studio, like causing a 27 car pile up on the freeway. Like it makes me like
Not
them a little
connected.
less.
I mean, I think they really tried to not do that.
They did, but it seemed like it made me a little. I don't know. I that part frustrated me because I was like, wow, you really were willing to risk a whole ton of shit for this one girl.
Love, Paige.
Yeah, but their whole thing is like, we don't want to hurt humans, but here's a 27 car pile.
This is actually a completely connected point, but also completely unconnected point.
Love it.
Which is, so Jasper and Emmett go this entire time inhaling Bella's scent and resisting and behaving.
Hmm.
And then do you remember in New Moon when she cuts herself and Jasper fucking loses his goddamn mind?
Yes.
And I just read
Yes.
it and I was like, now I'm confused.
Yeah. No, there was a little bit of.
Is Jasper in control or not in control? Like, was it just because it was unexpected? Like, why was it that he just loses his mind over a tiny little cut? But he, like, literally her entire body is bleeding and he's like, this is fine.
Also, why didn't Alice see that? Like, I feel like
It's
she'd
true,
be
her
like,
powers are super strong.
like the whole, especially at the end when like the second to last chapter, and we're seeing like the plot is playing out as Edward is watching a vision play out in her mind to cover up their story of how Bella got hurt. And I was like, that's really intense that she's basically writing the future by making various decisions in the moment. Like that's very, very powerful. So like why couldn't she have been like, hey Bella, be careful when you're
Shit.
opening those cards?
I don't know. I mean, there's that thing where it's much harder for her to see humans than vampires.
Fair.
But like still, you think you would have seen Jasper attack her?
Right. Or been understanding like maybe he was having a hard week of being in control, so like, I don't know, keep him out of there.
But Jasper also strong as shit.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing where like he just hides Bella in the field during the
Yeah.
baseball thing, and you're just like, and like it takes Edward time to figure out what the fuck's happening, and I'm just like,
Right.
holy shit, that's some serious power.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
The vampire powers are way cooler in Midnight Sun than they are in Twilight.
right? Because like we talked about this last episode about how like one of the coolest components of the series was the vampire lore, but it's like she's got conflicting genres going on between that's like teen romance and vampire shit. So like you don't get enough of either.
There are paranormal romances that are good. It's just that this one, I don't think she's as practiced as balancing it as she thinks she is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely agree.
I feel like this episode is gonna be shorter than I intended for some
Potentially.
reason. I think it's partly because we did so much Twilight stuff
Yeah. I
that
did
we've addressed so many issues.
I did want to be an asshole and harp on Edward's problematic behavior a little bit more.
We can do that.
Okay. So I had two
Like
things. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I literally highlighted because at one point he describes his behavior at stalking, and I literally highlighted it, and I was like, all right, so you know then.
Yeah. You're like, and you're still doing it. Two things that stuck out that really bothered me that were like kind of there in the original series, but like not as apparent because you're not in Edward's head was the first one is how quickly he turns to suicide if Bella's not in his life, which I think creates a very unhealthy picture of what you should do if your love doesn't work out.
Processing that.
What was that?
Yeah, I'm processing that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yes,
Like, I get he's a dramatic vampire ding
he is
dong,
a dramatic vampire.
but it's still like it bothered me how frequently it came up, and I was like, this might not go over well with impressionable teen girls.
I mean, I feel like it was worse for me in New Moon than it was
Yeah,
for
that
me for
was
Edward.
very bad.
I guess it's because like I don't know. For some reason, I did not pick up on that, and maybe it's because for me, I associated it. And this is not excusing it. This is not saying it's good. This is not saying it's fine. But I associate it with more him if he was ever going to harm Bella or actually make a very negative influence on her life,
Hmm.
as opposed to just losing her in general.
Oh, I think
And neither is fine, but you know what I'm saying. Where like
yeah,
I think that's I didn't pick up on it in terms of like, well, if Bella's not in my life, I'm going to kill myself. I interpret it as like, well, if I actually screw up Bella's life or hurt her in any way,
yeah,
which again, not great.
right.
But I think it went under my radar for that reason.
Well, there was one moment in particular that I think it's more obvious in terms of how I was interpreting it, and that was towards the end when they're en route to the ballet studio, and he immediately starts calculating what he's gonna do if she dies, and I'm just like, that's problematic.
Yes, but I feel like that also goes more to my point because it's literally she would have died because of him.
Yeah,
There would have been like a literal direct like causation
yeah, I get what you're
where
saying.
so yeah, suck it.
Hey, you said you're kind of agreeing with me while also
I
disagreeing
am.
with me.
I know. I am not emphatically disagreeing with you. I think I'm just trying to explain like why I didn't notice it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I can see that side of it. Um, my other thing kind of goes back to a point earlier where we were talking about how you can see more of Edward's awkward anxiety issues internally. But there were moments in Twilight where he'd say stuff, and I was like, yeah, you kind of sound like a dick right now. And then in Midnight Sun, he'd say those things, and he's acknowledging he sounds like a dick, or like he said something stupid or was really rude and offended her, but he doesn't ever apologize for it. He doesn't own up to it. He's not like, oh, I'm sorry that I didn't mean it that way, which I think is also
And
not okay.
I think that it's not okay, but it read so teenage boy to me.
It did, yeah.
I think that's another reason. I think these things are just flying under my radar because I'm like, yeah, he's 17.
Yeah.
He's not really, but I'm like
17.
17. But like, I just read it as like an idiot guy who's never had an actual meaningful interaction with a girl before and has absolutely no idea how to do that.
Mhm.
Like, because I definitely knew guys and know guys who are not capable of doing that,
Yeah, I think that makes
and
sense.
not in like a. And I'm not saying again, not saying it's fine, not saying it's okay. Edward's still a dick, but I do think that there was a level there of like, oh, I said a dick thing, so now I have to make up for it. But instead of saying sorry, he tries to be funny
Yeah,
or tease her, or like he's trying to make up for it, just not by apologizing. So it's like not great,
yeah. I think I
but
had a
like
hard time reminding myself of the aspect that this is also his first relationship, is because she did make him a 104-year-old vampire, so he doesn't. His mannerisms and the way he talks to her make you forget that he's a teenager and that's the situation. So like in my head, I'm like, dude, get your shit together. It's like I constantly forget this is technically a teenager who's also
so
experiencing his first love.
yes. I think that's what gets it for me is just just like a guy who's never been in love before and has absolutely no idea how to talk to girls and is just doing his best.
In some aspects, yes, I can agree with that. I don't know if I find it believable that he wouldn't have boned that entire time, though, based on the whole vampire shenanigans where they're more in tune with their animal instincts.
Guess so, but at the same time, Edward's so prudish that I feel like
He
it
really
really
is.
tracks for me.
He is.
Like, if
Yeah.
somebody was like, if Emmett hadn't met Rosalie, if someone was like, yeah, Emmett hasn't had sex, I'd be like, you're fucking
You're
lying.
wrong.
You're a liar. But like, someone's like, Edward's never had sex before. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I
That's
buy
fair.
that.
That's fair.
Yeah. Why do we have less to say about this? Why? What is it about Midnight Sun versus Twilight that does not inspire discussion?
I don't know. I feel like it's just because I personally was so bored, and I think I think I was expecting more differences out of this book, when really it was just so similar. So I'm like, that probably also contributed to my boredom.
Similar, but in like an interesting way to me. Like, there was enough difference for me that I was like, this is fine.
Yeah.
Because especially because I read them alternating, right? So like there'd be a moment where Edward would look away or make a face, and I'd be like, "What's that face?" And then I'd read My Night Sun, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's the face."
probably tricked yourself into enjoying it more because you alternately read the chapters.
Probably, but I'm fine with that.
Like almost 700 straight pages of self-loathing was just a little bit too much for me.
I mean, that's rough. 700 pages of straight self-loathing is definitely rough.
It was painful. I did enjoy the opening chapter though, because the opening of Twilight's kind of boring for me, and then we jump right into Midnight Sun, and Edward's like, "Holy fuck! I have to kill every student in this classroom so I can suck this girl's blood."
Yeah. And then he's just like doing all these scenarios. And you're kind of just like, "Oh, this is interesting."
Yeah, exactly.
I do feel I think what bothered me is that, so when you're reading alternating chapters of Bella and Edward, for the first, roughly up until about the halfway point, the chapters match up perfectly. They're 1 to 1 to 1 to 1.
Yep.
And then eventually Edward starts getting way more word count.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they stop matching up. And I think there's a level here for me where I'm like, Edward getting so much. I think that Stephanie Meyer is far more interested in Edward than she is in Bella.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about that privately before, about how maybe a little bit of internalized misogyny contributed to that, because I remember we discussed when we had originally read the leaked part of Midnight Sun, and we were like hopeful because we were like, this sounds better than Twilight.
I mean, like, I'm trying to think, because like I tend to write I'm more interested in the guys in my story than I am in the girls. But I almost feel like that's because
You're like living in a mind that's like less familiar.
yes,
That makes sense. That's a better way to put it.
it might be maybe a mix of both, or even just that.
I get that.
Like, so I feel like this entire episode is you saying things and then me defending Edward and Stephanie Meyer. But I do think she is definitely more interested in Edward than she is in Bella, and I think that's why Edward gets so much more word count, and that's why why the story gets more interesting when you read. Like, I feel like if she cut out all the verbose bullshit and all of the extra bullshit, do you think Midnight Sun would be a better book than Twilight?
Probably, because again, there were parts that interested me way more. It just like whenever we got like too far into Edward's mind and he was like rehashing the same arguments over and over again, is when I would pull back and feel lost. So I'm like, if it was a similar page count to Twilight, I probably would have enjoyed it far more.
I mean, goes back. I'm just gonna keep going back to a good editor, because a good editor makes you cut.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, the best stories are the stories that like you start cutting shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because what happens is you think something's really important, and then an editor reads it and goes, "This isn't really important."
Right. Yeah.
So
my favorite author talks about that all the time. She's like, her last book that came out was like 145k words, and she's like, I've got a folder of 160k words of stuff I cut from it.
It's just like, Stephanie Meyer would do so much better with a better editor. Yeah. So really, I'm not anti Stephanie Meyer. I'm anti her editor.
Yeah, fuck Stephanie Meyer's editor. Oh man, I'm really curious what Life and Death was like though. The like gender bend one.
Oh, I had to buy it for the library when I worked there.
Yeah.
I heard it was. My reviews said it was worse by it.
Interesting.
Because I think, if I recall correctly, and I should read it myself and not so like take these reviews with a grain of salt. My understanding was that it was more misogynistic because there was more stereotypes in place when it was gender bent.
Interesting. Now I kind of want to read it based on that assessment.
Grain of salt, but yeah.
That's fascinating, because I felt like she, in my opinion, it seemed like she felt compelled to write that to be like, see, it's not misogynistic. It's the same dynamic if the genders are swapped. So that's fascinating to me.
My tagline for all life, but your feminism be basic. So like, Stephanie Meyer's feminism is basic.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really, And
like,
I don't think she knows enough to write a feminist book.
And I don't want to harsh on anyone's religion, but I feel like it's kind of hard to fully embrace feminism when you follow Mormonism.
I think it very much depends on the person.
Yeah.
And how strictly you follow Mormonism.
Right, yeah.
Because, I mean, there has to, I'm not positive, I don't know enough about this, but it has to be like, kind of like non-practicing Jews, where you're still a Jew, but like, you don't.
That's true, yeah.
Or like, there's a level of belief there, but then you're kind of picking and choosing based on your own like moral beliefs or whatever.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. nothing against Mormons. So it's just maybe a guess at why she might have a hard time like fully reaching.
I mean, that was a
Part
big
of
thing
this.
when the book came out, was her Mormonism.
Yeah, well, because it kind of came out in the series as she went on, when like they didn't have sex until they got married, and then immediately had a child, and all that jazz.
I mean, it's definitely influenced her.
Yeah.
And the series for sure, which is hard to do when you follow a religion to not have it.
Yeah, absolutely
influence what you're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna be very boring this episode. I feel like we're trying. We're trying not to be boring.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a very interesting. The people are gonna leave this episode and be like, "Do I read it or not?"
I think you should read it.
If
you enjoyed Twilight to a certain extent, like don't read this book if you're like, I hated Twilight and I'm interested in seeing if this makes me hate Twilight. Yes,
I would agree with that, because I think where we left off in the last episode, you were feeling more Twilight positive than I was, so I think that's why we kind of went the directions we did with Midnight Sun. Or if you haven't read Twilight in a while, pick up Midnight Sun and read them alternatively the way Aaron did, because I feel like that would be interesting.
Do that. Yeah. For sure, do that.
Yeah. So create your own story.
Do it. I believe in you.
Yeah. And before we sign off, we need to talk about our big news. Is that
still haven't done? I completely forgot we haven't even mentioned it on an episode yet.
Yeah. So as of right now, we're doing a bi-weekly schedule, but starting September 1st, you can go to Twitch, look us up at Pixel Perfect Podcast, and catch our episodes live at 6 p.m. every Tuesday. So we're moving to a weekly format. And then, if you can't catch it live, we'll still be uploading to SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, all that jazz.
And we're way more organized now, so we actually have the episodes planned out like 2 months in advance.
Quite a schedule of stuff coming up. We'll be talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender next Tuesday, and the episodes will be roughly the same length, which is anywhere from 30 minutes to 50 minutes. But we'll have a Q&A portion afterwards, so if you're there and you have questions about our opinions, or you want to share some of your own thoughts, there'll be a Q&A portion at the end, so we can talk to people who are watching.
Only at the end, though.
Only at the end, yes, because it'll be you see how easily distracted we are just talking to each other. So if we try to acknowledge audience chit chat in the middle of something, it's just gonna go off the rails.
At the end, we will try and go through your comments and try to adjust everything that people are saying.
Yep, absolutely.
Do we have any other news adjacent to that? I'm trying to think of. I feel like there's something we're missing in this announcement.
I don't think so. I think just the new format. You might be thinking of our future news for next year, but keep that a secret for now.
Well, I'm gonna start doing it.
That's true. That's true.
We're just not doing it.
I mean,
yes.
Go for it.
So once I get my new fancy computer, I'm gonna start streaming to Twitch as well.
On that same
Paige
channel,
does not want to join. Yes, on the same channel. Paige does not want to join me for a little bit.
No, I'm currently house hunting, and that's going to consume my entire life. So we'll revisit it next year.
Yeah. Oh, but I'll be streaming. I'll do like Stardew Valley, Hollow Knight. I want to do this really cool game called What Remains of Edith Finch.
That sounds really familiar.
If you're
good game. Yeah. I did watch someone play that.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that, if like smaller indie games that don't require a lot of talent, I mean Hollow Knight definitely requires talent, but I'm gonna do my best to not die over and over again. So if you're interested,
we're streaming.
You.
Thank you. I'll be lingering in the chat if I have time, so I'll try to say hi, but should be a good time. So don't forget Pixel Perfect Podcast on Twitch. I'll link that below in the description or in the episode descriptions for
following us. There'll be reminders everywhere too.
Yes, all over the social medias. That's what I'm calling it now. I'm hip.
And if you're watching on YouTube, there's no video because my internet sucks.
Yeah,
so sorry about that.
Video today. Womp womp.
I'm gonna buy a new modem. It's gonna be fine.
Yes. All right. We'll catch you guys next Tuesday.
Bye.